Believe it or not, at 33 I own a successful Café in Seattle, but 25 years ago I was just an 80-year-old girl abandoned by my own family. My dad took my brother, my mum took my sister, and no one took me. After 2 decades of silence, they suddenly wanted to return to my life, expecting to find the same desperate little girl they once left behind. But that little girl is gone. In her place stands a woman who built herself from nothing. My name is Claire Morgan, and before I share my story, let me explain where I come from. We lived in a small town on the coast of Maine, in a house overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Before everything fell apart, we were what most people would call an ordinary family. Our house stood on a rocky shore with a breathtaking view of the endless Atlantic waters. I remember how the evening sun painted the waves in golden tones, casting dancing reflections across the surface. In the yard stood an old oak tree, where my dad had hung a swing made from a car tire. When we played on it, our retriever, Charlie, would run circles around the yard until we all collapsed on the grass, laughing at his silly antics. My dad, Richard, worked as a history teacher at the local school. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and strong arms, always dusted with chalk from his lectures. He always smelled of printer's paper and mint gum, a scent that, for me, became the very symbol of warmth and safety. My mom, Linda, coordinated the local charity foundation. She had a contagious laugh that started soft and then grew until her whole body shook with joy. During the day, her dark blonde hair was pulled back into a practical ponytail, but in the evenings she let it down and allowed me to brush it while I counted to 50. My brother Ethan was 2 years older than me. He was 10 when everything changed. He was my protector, the one who taught me how to ride a bike, running beside me until I found my balance, cheering loudly when I finally pedaled on my own. Ethan collected baseball cards and knew all the stats by heart and numbers he would recite to me, though I rarely understood their meaning. What I did understand was the pride in his voice when he explained them. Lily was my younger sister, just 6 years old when our family fell apart. She had airy blonde curls and the habit of following me everywhere. I read her bedtime stories, giving each character a different voice until she fell asleep. She had a stuffed elephant named Ellie that went with her everywhere, 1 year warmth thin from being dragged across the floor. Our house wasn't fancy, but it was ours. In my bedroom, glow-in-the-dark stars spread across the ceiling like a galaxy I stared at while falling asleep. The kitchen had yellow curtains my mom had sewn herself, and around the dining table stood mismatched chairs my dad had picked up at school sales and lovingly restored. Sundays were pancake days. Dad stood at the stove flipping perfect golden circles while Mom sliced fruit. Ethan would sneak chocolate chips into the batter when Dad wasn't looking, and Lily would giggle at his mischief, his little accomplice. My job was to set the table, carefully placing each fork and knife, feeling so grown up with my important duty. Summers meant trips to the ocean, where we spent entire days building sandcastles that Lily decorated with seashells and feathers. Mom read romance novels under an umbrella while Dad taught Ethan and me to swim. In the evenings, sunburned and tired, we'd buy ice cream that melted down our wrists as we watched the sky turn watercolor shades of pink and purple at sunset. When I turned 8, Mom threw me a birthday party with a rainbow cake and balloons tied to every chair. Friends from school came, then we played freeze tag in the yard until dusk. Dad turned on the sprinkler so we could run through the streams of water, while Mom snapped photos with her old film camera, carefully documenting every moment. I felt so special, so loved not knowing it would be our last celebration as a whole family. Looking back, there had been small signs of trouble that I was too young to recognize. Dad's teaching job had become unstable. Some months paid enough, others led to hushed conversations behind closed doors. Mom's growing frustration with our financial struggles showed in the strained smile she wore whenever bills arrived. But children rarely notice such things until they become impossible to ignore. For the longest time, our home felt safe, warm, filled with the simple magic of family life. Game nights where Dad would dramatically accuse Mom of cheating at Monopoly. Weeknight dinners where each of us had to share the best part of our day. The way Mom kissed each of us on the forehead before school, leaving behind the faint scent of floral perfume. All those little moments formed the foundation of my world, a world I thought was as solid as the stone walls of our house. I didn't yet know that foundations can crack, that homes built on love can still collapse. I couldn't imagine a future where the 5 of us would become strangers, or that I would be the one left behind while everyone else moved on. The memories of that time are both precious and painful reminders of everything I lost and everything I had to rebuild on my own. The first real fracture in our family's foundation came when Dad lost his job due to school budget cuts. I remember the night he came home hours later than usual, his face ashen with defeat. Mom sent us kids outside to play, but their voices carried through the first serious fight I had ever overheard. "How could you risk everything on that one job, Richard?" The Mom's voice was sharp, accusing, unlike anything I'd heard from her before. It was a steady position, and how was I supposed to know they'd cut half the teaching staff? Their dad's voice thundered back, defensive and raw. That night I heard Mom crying in their bedroom, muffled sobs she tried to bury in her pillow. Dad slept on the couch, and breakfast the next morning was so quiet the tension hung heavy in the air like fog. In the weeks that followed, Mom started taking extra shifts. She left before we woke and sometimes returned after we were already in bed. Her absence left a hollow space in our routines, no one to help with homework, no one to listen to our school stories. Dad tried to fill both roles, but he was distracted, always on the phone looking for work while unpaid bills piled up on the kitchen table. One night I got up for a glass of water and overheard him whispering into the phone, "I don't know how we'll pay the mortgage this month, the savings are gone, and Linda's extra shifts barely cover utilities." The fear in his voice twisted my stomach into knots. Ethan withdrew into himself, spending more time alone behind closed doors. He stopped inviting friends over and quit his baseball team, claiming he'd lost interest. But I saw the way his fingers lingered on his glove, brushing the worn leather with longing. Lily began having nightmares, waking up screaming about monsters under her bed. I'd crawl in beside her, stroking her hair until she drifted off again, whispering reassurances I barely believed myself. Our parents were too consumed by their own struggles to notice how we were all unraveling. That Christmas was just a shadow of our old celebrations. No tree, no gifts, only a small dinner Mom managed between shifts, during which our parents barely spoke to each other. Ethan pushed food around his plate while Lily kept asking when Santa was coming, and questions our parents dodged until she finally gave up. In January, our grandparents came to visit. I overheard their hushed, worried tones as they spoke with Mom and Dad. They offered help, though I didn't understand what kind. Whatever it was, my parents refused, Dad's pride still intact even as everything else around us crumbled. "We'll handle it ourselves," he insisted, while Grandma's face wrinkled with worry. Dad started drinking. Not every night, but often enough that the trash filled with empty beer cans faster than before. He'd fall asleep in front of the TV, sometimes not even making it to bed. Mom became emotionally distant, going through the motions of care without the warmth that had once defined her presence. Mornings became my responsibility. I woke early to make oatmeal for Ethan and Lily while our parents slept in or were already gone. At 8 years old, I became the keeper of routines, making sure teeth were brushed and backpacks ready. I walked Lily to her classroom, promising to meet her after school, with stepping into a role no child should ever have to fill. One afternoon, coming home early from a friend's house, I overheard Mom on the phone in her bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, one hand rubbing her forehead as if to ward off a headache. "I just don't know what options we have left, Lisa," she said to my aunt. "The kids, I can't give them the life they deserve in these conditions." There was a pause. "We've talked about divorce, but then what happens with the kids? Who goes where?" The cold horror of those words has haunted me ever since. Who goes where? As if we were furniture to be divided in the settlement. And that was when I began to understand that this was only the beginning of the nightmare that would turn my life upside down. The fights grew worse. One night it got so bad that Dad punched the wall in the living room. I watched from the staircase, frozen with fear, as Mom screamed that he was out of control. Ethan pulled me back into our room, where Lily was already hiding under the blankets. The three of us huddled together on my bed, his arm wrapped protectively around us while we listened to the sounds of our family coming apart. Later that week, I found Mom crying alone in the bathroom. The door wasn't fully closed, and through the crack I saw her sitting on the toilet lid, her shoulders silently shaking. I wanted to go to her to offer the same comfort I gave Lily after her nightmares, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the realization that some pains are too heavy for a child to fix. I started inventing distraction games for my brother and sister. We built elaborate forts in the basement with old sheets and furniture. I created scavenger hunts through the house and yard, anything to shield them from the reality of our crumbling family and give them moments of normal childhood amid the chaos. But I couldn't distract myself from the truth. Something had broken beyond repair between our parents. Dad moved into the basement guest room. The separation inside our home felt like a prelude to something worse. At night, I lay awake, listening for signs of reconciliation that never came, imagining scenarios where they worked it all out and we went back to being the family we once were. The day I found divorce papers in Mom's purse was the day Hope died. I hadn't been snooping, I was just looking for gum, but there they were, official-looking documents with words like dissolution of marriage and custody agreement. I didn't understand all the legal terms, but I understood enough. This wasn't temporary. This was the end. That evening, after we were supposed to be in bed, I sat at the top of the stairs and listened as my parents discussed which child would go where. The casual way they divided us still makes my blood run cold when I think about it. Dad said Ethan should go with him, that a boy needed a man's influence at his age. Mom counted that Lily would stay with her, that she was too young to be without her mother. I held my breath, waiting for one of them to mention me, to fight for me, to claim me the way they did Ethan and Lily. But the conversation shifted to financial arrangements and visitation schedules, and my name was never spoken. As if I didn't exist, as if I were invisible to the very people who had given me life. That night I cried silently into my pillow, careful not to wake Lily, who had climbed into my bed again. I faced the first devastating realization of my young life. In the reorganization of our family, there was no place for me. What would you do if your parents divided the family and forgot you? Could you rationalize their motives, or would you feel betrayed forever? The morning everything changed forever started like any other. I woke up early, as I had grown used to, and went downstairs for breakfast. I found Dad and Ethan in the living room with suitcases beside them. Dad was kneeling in front of Ethan, his hands on his shoulders, speaking in a low, serious tone. He told me they were going on a trip, that they needed time alone together, away from everything, to figure things out. Ethan looked confused, his eyes red as if he had been crying. When he hugged me goodbye, he whispered that he would call soon, that he promised. His voice trembled with uncertainty. I clung to him, somehow knowing this wasn't just a trip, that something more permanent was happening. Dad barely glanced at me as they left, only muttering that I should behave for Mom before ushering Ethan out to the car. I noticed several trash bags in the trunk stuffed with what looked like clothes and toys. Not luggage for a trip, but belongings for a move. After they left, Mom locked herself in the bedroom and didn't come out. I heard her sobbing through the door, but my knocking went unanswered. Lily kept asking where Dad and Ethan had gone, and I didn't know what to tell her. That night we ate oatmeal for dinner, and I read her 3 extra bedtime stories, trying to maintain some semblance of normal. The next day, Mom stayed in her room again. I made peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, helped Lily brush her teeth, and kept dialing Dad's cell over and over. It always went to voicemail. That night Lily and I slept together in my bed again, her small body pressed against me for the comfort we both desperately needed. On the 3rd day, Mom emerged from the bedroom looking hollow but determined. She moved through the house with robotic efficiency, pulling out suitcases and filling them with Lily's clothes and toys. When I asked what she was doing, she said that she and Lily needed a fresh start, that they were going to Aunt Lisa's. My question about what would happen to me made her expression flicker between guilt and resolve. She said I would stay here for now, that they'd come back for me when things were settled. She promised it, but I didn't believe her. I was 8 years old, powerless to stop what was happening. Lily cried when she realized I wasn't coming, reaching out for me from Mom's arms as they headed to the car. Her face was red with tears as she sobbed, asking why I couldn't go too. Mom replied that I had to stay in case Dad came back. It was a lie I recognized even then. She added that we'd be together again soon. And then they were gone, and I was left alone in our house. Completely alone at 8 years old. The first day by myself, I pretended it was an adventure. I ate ice cream for breakfast because there was no one to tell me not to. I watched TV shows Mom had never allowed. I jumped on my parents' bed. But freedom quickly gave way to fear when darkness fell and the house made strange noises I had never noticed before. That night I slept with every light in the house on. Charlie the dog curled protectively at my feet. The next morning I realized no one had fed him, so I dumped an entire box of kibble into his bowl, not knowing how much he needed but wanting to make sure he had enough. By the 3rd day alone, the food situation was becoming critical. I had gone through the easy options: cereal, peanut butter sandwiches. The milk had spoiled. I didn't know how to cook anything that required the stove or oven. Charlie and I shared crackers and slices of cheese from the fridge. I kept calling Dad and now Mom too, but neither answered. I left tearful messages begging them to come back for me, pleading not to be left alone anymore. The silence in return was deafening. On the 4th day, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Garcia from next door stood there, concern etched on her face. She was a petite woman with greying hair pulled into a neat bun and kind brown eyes behind thin frame glasses. She always wore a floral apron and smelled of cinnamon from her constant baking. Mrs. Garcia had noticed I was home alone and wanted to check if everything was okay. I lied, saying Mom had just gone to the store and would be back soon, but Mrs. Garcia saw right through it, especially when Charlie bounded up behind me, clearly hungry, and then walked. Her maternal instinct, honed by raising 4 children of her own, sensed immediately that something was wrong. That's when I broke, sobbing out everything. Dad had taken Ethan, Mom had taken Lily, and no one had taken me. How they promised to come back but never called. How the food was running out and how terrified I was at night. Mrs. Garcia's face shifted from concern to horror as I spoke. She brought me into her home, fed me a real meal, and called the authorities. By that evening, a social worker named Ms. Julia Reynolds was sitting across from me in Mrs. Garcia's living room, asking questions I didn't know how to answer. Miss Reynolds was a young woman, maybe around 30, with short chestnut hair and tight green eyes that spoke of having seen too many cases like mine. She wore a crisp navy suit, but spoke softly, trying to make the terrible situation less frightening for an 8-year-old child. In her hands was a worn folder with my name neatly written on the front. She asked if I knew where my parents had gone. I didn't. If I had grandparents or relatives nearby. No one close enough. How long I had been alone. 4 days. Her voice was gentle, but she couldn't hide the pity in her eyes. That pity would become a familiar expression on adults' faces throughout my life. She explained that I would have to go with her, that I couldn't stay in an empty house, that they would try to contact my parents. She let me pack a small bag of clothes and take my stuffed bear Howard, who had been with me since infancy. Charlie, our dog, was taken to an animal shelter, yet another loss in a week already full of them. The family court hearing a week later was cold and impersonal, full of adults speaking about me as though I weren't even there. Neither of my parents showed up, though they had supposedly been notified. The judge declared me a ward of the state. And just like that, in less than 2 weeks, I stopped being a daughter and became a line in a custody file. But the real hell was only beginning. My first foster placement was with the Thompsons, a couple with 3 biological children who took in foster kids mostly for the extra income. They weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. I slept on a pull-out couch in their basement family room, my belongings stuffed into a black trash bag. Their kids treated me with suspicion, never including me in their games. I was a stranger in their house, a temporary inconvenience. At night, I listened to their laughter upstairs, games I was never invited to join. I wrote letters to Ethan and Lily, pouring my heart onto paper and sending them to Aunt Lisa's house. Weeks later, they came back stamped return to sender, address unknown. Each returned letter cut like a wound. Once I managed to call Dad's cell. A woman answered with a sharp tone, saying he couldn't come to the phone. When I introduced myself as his daughter, there was a long pause, then she promised to pass along the message. He never called back. Eventually, I learned both parents had moved to different states. Dad had taken Ethan to Wisconsin, Mom and Lily were in Indiana. Neither left contact information with the foster agency. Neither showed up to any of the court hearings about my custody. 6 months later, I received a birthday card from Ethan and forwarded multiple times. It said his Warner with a short message, "Happy birthday, Claire, I miss you." I slept with that card under my pillow until the fragile paper thinned and fell apart from tears and time. A month later, the Thompsons decided to focus on their own kids. I quietly began packing what little I owned, realizing once again I was unwanted. My second placement was with the Ramirezes, who housed 5 other foster children in their cramped home. Mr. Ramirez was strict to the point of military discipline, while Mrs. Ramirez was indifferent. I slept on the top bunk in a crowded room meant for one, crammed with 3 of us instead. Switching schools made it even harder to make friends. I was the foster kid with thrift store clothes and no parents to show up at school events. I grew quiet, focusing on my studies. School became the only escape from pain, the only refuge I had. One of the older foster boys, Damon, often stole from the younger kids. Once he took my bracelet, the only real gift I had ever received. When I tried to get it back, he threatened to tell the foster parents lies about me. That's when I learned a harsh truth. Sometimes you had to accept losses in order to survive. Social workers came and went with unsettling frequency, each new one knowing less about my case than the last. I learned to say what they wanted to hear. Knowing complaints rarely changed anything. One worker carelessly mentioned that my siblings were doing well. Ethan was playing baseball and excelling in school. Lily was taking dance lessons. They were thriving while I was surviving. What do you think is better, to endure for the sake of a roof over your head, or to fight for yourself and risk losing everything? After 8 months, I was moved to the Williams family. But the picture of warmth they showed the world collapsed as soon as the doors closed. Mrs. Williams' warm smile turned cold. To her, I was never good enough. Her cutting words came daily, sharp enough to wound but quiet enough that no one else noticed. She could beam sweetly at her husband and, in the same breath, tell me it was no wonder my parents hadn't wanted me. Those words sliced into me deeper than she could imagine. If I had been her daughter, she would have been ashamed. I learned to make myself invisible, to anticipate needs, to plan ways to avoid criticism. Insomnia set in, and my grades began to suffer from exhaustion. After a year, I was transferred to the worst placement yet at the Jacksons' house. Mrs. Jackson collected children for the stipend, keeping us on strict rations. Food was used as punishment. At 14, hungry and desperate, I ran away. For 3 days I lived in a park, stealing food, until the police found me. The Jacksons didn't want me back. That was when a school counsellor, Ms. Rivera, noticed my potential. She was a middle-aged woman with sharp brown eyes who never spoke down to me. Despite my uneven grades, my test scores were exceptional. She told me my mind was my ticket out of the situation. My new placement was with Ms. Harriet, an older woman who had fostered dozens of teens. She offered clear boundaries and expectations. On the first night, she explained she wasn't replacing anyone but could provide stability, respect, and opportunity. For the first time in years, I felt genuine stability. Predictable routines day after day. No yelling, no threats. The smell of dinner at 6, not the hunger that used to be punishment. She checked my homework, went to meetings, and advocated for me. I found comfort in art. Miss Harriet noticed my drawings and bought me real sketchbooks and pencils. On paper, I expressed emotions I couldn't put into words. She hung my best work in the hallway with quiet acknowledgement of my talent. Miss Rivera, the counsellor, and Miss Harriet began encouraging me to consider college. They helped me research programs and scholarships for former foster youth. For the first time, I allowed myself to picture a future. But life had another trial waiting for me. During my senior year, Miss Harriet was diagnosed with cancer. She told me plainly, without drama or excessive emotion. She had 6 months, maybe less. She updated her well and spoke with my social worker. I would need a new placement to finish out the school year. I was 17, less than a year from aging out of the system anyway. The thought of yet another move, another adjustment, was exhausting. But more than that, I was facing the loss of the only adult who had consistently guided me for nearly a decade. Miss Harriet's condition grew steadily worse, and it was clear change was coming again. Within 3 months, she was in hospice, and I was moved back into temporary care, this time with a couple who fostered mainly for religious reasons and spent every day trying to convert me to their faith. I visited Miss Harriet every afternoon after school until the end, holding her hand and reading aloud from her favourite books. Her funeral was small but dignified, attended mostly by former foster children whose lives she had touched. We were a mismatched group of ages, backgrounds, and outcomes, united by our shared time in her home. It was the first time since my family's abandonment that I felt true grief, a measure of how rare meaningful connections had become in my life. 2 months later, I turned 18 and aged out of foster care. I had a high school diploma, admission to a community college on scholarships for former foster youth, and $752 in savings from my part-time jobs. I had no family to turn to, no home to return to, no safety net if I failed. With my meager savings, I secured a spot in a shared apartment with 3 other girls, all students at different colleges around Seattle. The place was small, the neighborhood questionable, but it was the first space that truly felt mine, even if I only rented a corner of it. I enrolled in community college while working 2 jobs, morning shifts at a local diner and evenings at a mall store. Between work and classes, I averaged 5 hours of sleep a night, but this exhaustion felt different from the fatigue of foster care years. This exhaustion came with paychecks, with credits accumulating toward a degree, with forward motion. In my 2nd semester, I signed up for an art history elective. Professor Mason noticed my doodles in the margins of my notes and asked to see more. Reluctantly, I showed him my sketchbook, expecting the polite encouragement adults usually gave kids. Instead, he was genuinely impressed. He told me I had a natural understanding of composition and light and asked if I'd ever considered pursuing art seriously. The thought had never crossed my mind. Art had always been my escape, my therapy. But Professor Mason's interest sparked something. He connected me with the college's art department, helped me apply for a special scholarship for fine arts students, and guided me through building a real portfolio. By the end of my 2nd year at community college, I had secured a full scholarship to complete my bachelor's degree at a state university. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel true pride in my achievements, to acknowledge that I had built opportunities for myself despite starting with nothing. Moving into the university dorm introduced me to Zoe, who became my first real best friend since childhood. She studied business, practical and ambitious, but with a creativity that complemented my more artistic leanings. We stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, the kind of effortless friendship I had always watched others enjoy but never experienced myself. One night, sharing pizza in our dorm room, she noticed that I never talked about family. I brushed it off with the practiced nonchalance I'd perfected over the years, saying I didn't have one. Zoe didn't press, didn't offer empty sympathy. She just nodded and said I could spend the holidays with her family if I wanted. Her mum always cooked too much and loved having extra guests. That simple offer meant more than she could ever know. For the next 3 years, I spent Thanksgivings and Christmases with Zoe's loud, loving family, watching their easy affection and learning what a healthy family looked like. It was both healing and painful, a glimpse of what I'd missed, but also of what was possible. Can you imagine what it's like to learn how to be part of a family at 20 years old when others have known it since birth? During my junior year, I landed a work-study position at the University Gallery, helping with exhibition setups and administrative tasks. I discovered I had a talent not just for creating art, but also for curating, for understanding how pieces fit together to tell a coherent story. I became fascinated with the intersection of art and commerce as much as with the creative side. That same year, I met James in an advanced painting class. He was thoughtful and patient, never pushing me to share more than I was ready. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared interests. He became the first person I told the full truth about my abandonment. One evening, sitting on the floor of his apartment, the words spilled out of me like a flood after years of careful silence. When I finally finished, he quietly admitted he'd long suspected my struggles with trust. We had known each other for 8 months, and only then could I bring myself to share what I had hidden all my life. He smiled, gently brushed hair from my face, and said it was fair because here I was beside him, letting him into my story. And that choosing to do so after everything I'd endured was an act of incredible courage. James helped me see that my protective walls, while essential for survival, were also preventing me from fully experiencing life. With his encouragement, I started therapy at the University Counselling Centre, finally confronting the trauma of abandonment I had carried alone for so long. Graduation came with bittersweet triumph. I earned my degree with honours, walked the stage to the cheers of Zoe and James, but felt sharply the absence of family. No parents beaming with pride, no siblings waving from the audience. Even after all those years, there was still an empty space where they should have been. After graduation, I used my gallery experience to land a job as an assistant at a small contemporary art space in Seattle. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it was in my field a small foot in the door to the art world. I shared an apartment with Zoe, who had landed an entry-level marketing job, and I continued therapy, determined to build a healthier relationship with my past. My career grew steadily. Within 2 years, I was promoted to associate curator, responsible for discovering new artists and conceptualizing exhibitions. The gallery director recognized my emerging talent and ability to communicate effectively with artists, skills that set me apart from my peers. But personal growth wasn't as linear as professional advancement. One day, walking through Pike Place Market, I spotted a man who looked like my father, the same build, the same gait, the same way of tilting his head while waiting to cross the street. A panic attack hit without warning, leaving me gasping on the crowded sidewalk, disoriented, suddenly 8 years old again, watching him drive away with my brother. That incident sent me back to therapy with renewed determination. I needed to address not only the abandonment itself, but the ongoing ways it shaped my daily life, my relationships, and my sense of self. I began to understand that healing wasn't a destination, but a process, one I would likely be part of for the rest of my life. During this time, I built a close circle of friends who became the family I chose. Alongside Zoe, there was Marcus, a chef who hosted dinners in his tiny apartment, Lena, a librarian with encyclopedic knowledge of obscure facts, and David, a software developer with dry wit who never failed to make me laugh. We created our own traditions and support systems, showing up for each other in ways my biological family never had. Weekend gatherings where we shared our victories and failures over cocktails. Holiday dinners where everyone brought dishes from their diverse backgrounds. Movie marathons, game tournaments, impromptu dance parties in living rooms too small for our enthusiasm. These rituals became the substitute for the family traditions I'd lost and helped create new memories layered over the painful old ones. After 3 years of saving every extra dollar, I took the leap and opened my own small gallery. The space was modest, a former bookstore in a neighborhood on the edge of gentrification, but it was mine. I focused on showcasing local artists who might otherwise go unseen, especially those who had grown up in difficult circumstances like me. And that's when a turning point arrived, one I could never have predicted. The gallery's success exceeded my expectations. Art critics praised my fresh perspective and almost uncanny ability to spot talent before it broke through. Local publications featured the space in the city's cultural guides. Artists sought me out, trusting that I would represent their work with honesty and care. By 29, I had the financial stability to buy my first apartment, a one-bedroom loft in a converted building with high ceilings perfect for the art I had begun collecting. On the day I signed the mortgage papers, I sat alone in the empty space, keys in my hand, and cried not from sadness, but from realization. I had created security for myself. After years of temporary houses and borrowed corners, I now had tangible proof I could give myself what my parents had failed to provide. My relationship with Michael began during this period of stability and success. He was an architect who first came to one of my gallery openings, more interested in the building's features than the art, until I caught him studying a particularly complex installation with genuine curiosity. Unlike James, who had helped me start the journey of healing but ultimately wanted more emotional openness than I could give, Michael understood boundaries. Having lost his own mother at a young age, he recognized the resilience that comes from navigating profound early loss. On our third date, he noted that we were both building our lives from the ground up. There is something beautiful about creating exactly what you want without the weight of expectations, he said. For years, I had conducted occasional online searches for my family, looking up Ethan and Liz's names, checking social media for traces of my parents. Those searches became less frequent as I built my own life. The desperate need to reconnect slowly gave way to curiosity, then to something close to indifference. I made a conscious decision to stop searching, to focus on the present and the future instead of a past I couldn't change. I found peace in accepting that family could be chosen, that blood was only one kind of bond. The people who came to my gallery openings, who helped me move into my apartment, who remembered my birthday without reminders, who held me when old grief resurfaced unexpectedly, they were my true family. They had earned that title through consistent presence and care, not genetic obligation. By my early 30s, I had built a life that felt whole and meaningful. I ran a thriving art cafe, an evolution of my gallery, where people could enjoy local art while sipping coffee and working on their laptops. I owned my space, supported artistic movements, and had relationships grounded in mutual respect and understanding. The 8-year-old girl who was once left behind was still a part of me, but she no longer defined my destiny. I had become who she would have dreamed to be, turning abandonment into independence, rejection into strength, loss into creation. I believed I had finally made peace with my past. And then Ethan found me on social media, and the past I thought was buried came crashing back with devastating force. The message came on an ordinary morning. I was in my cafe office reviewing artist submissions for an upcoming exhibit. A notification popped up and I clicked absent-mindedly, expecting a note from a client or colleague. Instead, I stared at a name I hadn't seen in 20 years, Ethan Morgan. Claire, it's Ethan, your brother. I don't know if you remember me, but I've been searching for you for years. I just found your cafe's website. Can we talk, please? The coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering on the floor. I barely noticed. My entire focus narrowed to the small rectangle of text on the screen. It took me 2 days to respond. 2 days of discussing it with my therapist, with Michael, with Zoe. 2 days of weighing the potential benefits of reconnecting against the guaranteed upheaval it would bring to the life I had so carefully built. My reply was brief: I remember you, we can talk. Ethan sent his phone number immediately. When I called, his voice was deeper than I remembered, but it carried the same cadence, the same slight hesitation before important words. I can't believe I found you, he said, his voice low and raw with emotion. I've been searching on and off for years, and now I did, though why now? I blurted. That question had burned in me from the moment his message arrived. The story unfolded slowly first in that call, then in several that followed. I learned Ethan was now married with 2 children. He had built a life as a programmer in Wisconsin, not far from where Dad had once taken him. He had tried searching for me all those years, but his efforts were scattered, the information too scarce. The searches always led to dead ends. At first, Dad forbade us from contacting each other. He said it would only confuse everyone, that a clean break was best. By the time Ethan was grown and could decide for himself, he no longer knew where to begin. A recent health scare in the family had pushed him to try again, digging deeper online until he stumbled across my cafe's website, complete with a professional buyer. That's how he realized he had finally found the sister he'd been searching for. Lily's been looking for you too, he added, dropping another bomb. She never stopped talking about you, even when we were supposed to pretend the past didn't exist. Piece by piece, I learned what had happened to my family after they left me. Dad's business had eventually stabilized in Wisconsin, though he never reached the success he dreamed of. He remarried when Ethan was in high school, a relationship that ended when his drinking became a problem. Now he lived alone in a small apartment in Milwaukee, his health declining. Mom had stayed with Aunt Lisa in Indiana for a few months, then moved to Ohio with Lily to start over. When Lily turned 10, Mom remarried, this time to a kind, steady man who was a reliable partner for her and a good stepfather for Lily. Around the same time, she found work as a nurse's aide at a local hospital, slowly piecing her life together. Ethan said she had expressed regret over what had happened with me, though she never made any real effort to find me or make amends. Lily had become an elementary school music teacher. She had been engaged twice but never married, breaking off both relationships before reaching the altar. She lived in Columbus, an hour from Mom, but maintained healthy boundaries with her. During our fourth call, Ethan mentioned there was going to be a family gathering. Dad was turning 60 and his health scare had made everyone realize time wasn't infinite. They wanted me to come. I kept repeating the words in my head and they felt foreign, like they didn't belong to me. The same people who had left me alone in an empty house at 8 years old. Even through the phone, I could feel how hard it was for Ethan to talk about it. That time had been difficult for all of us. Dad had barely been functioning, and Mom, as we now understood, had been in a deep depression. They had made terrible decisions, but they had changed. Anger broke through the numbness that had gripped me since Ethan first reached out. But deep down, I knew no explanation could ever justify abandoning a child. Nothing could. Yes, people can regret their worst mistakes, and maybe the family wanted a chance to apologize to make amends. But I laughed bitterly without humor. How do you make it right when 10 years of my life were spent in foster care? 10 years of moving from house to house, my belongings stuffed into trash bags. While I was learning to survive chaos, Ethan grew up with Dad, playing baseball, living almost a normal childhood despite the split. How could he possibly understand what that betrayal meant for me? A week after Ethan's first call, my younger sister Lily reached out. Her voice was both familiar and strange, the childish tones gone, replaced by that of a grown woman, but still carrying the same open emotion I remembered. Lily admitted she had never forgotten me. All those years she had kept a photo from her 6th birthday hidden from everyone. She would look at it before bed, afraid of losing me entirely. Unlike Ethan, cautious and pragmatic in our reunion, Lily swung between tearful nostalgia and bursts of excitement. She wanted immediate closeness, made plans for visits and holidays, as if 2 decades apart could be erased in a single step. When I asked why she hadn't tried to find me sooner, her answer revealed the family narrative that had been built in my absence. Lily said she had been told I was living with our grandparents, and that's what Mom explained when she was little. It wasn't until high school that Lily learned the truth, but by then no one seemed to know where I really was. The most unexpected revelation came not in words, but in a package delivered to my Café the following week. The return address bore my mother's name in Ohio. Just seeing her handwriting still recognizable after all these years sent cold shock through me. Inside was a worn stuffed bear, my childhood friend Howard, whom I had long believed lost forever. He had survived all those years. Pinned to him was a note written in the same hand as the address. I kept him safe for you. I should have kept you safe too. I am so sorry, Claire. Please call when you're ready. Love, Mom. I sat at the cafe counter, holding that bear, feeling the armor I had so carefully built begin to crack. The signature on that note felt like an attempt to erase 2 decades with a single line. I couldn't accept that, and I took the letter away. But I kept Howard, replacing him on a shelf in my bedroom, where he stood as a reminder of the past I had endured. In that moment, I made a decision that would define not only my future with my biological family, but also who I allowed myself to become after everything I had lived through. If you were faced with a family who had abandoned you, now asking for forgiveness after 20 years, would you forgive, or protect the peace you had fought so hard to build? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please subscribe. Your support means everything to someone who knows what it's like to build yourself from nothing. Remember, your past shapes you, but it does not have to define you. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it brings comfort to anyone who has ever felt abandoned or forgotten. You are not alone, and your story matters too. That's the end of today's story. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so share them in the comments below. I truly enjoy reading what you have to say. If you'd like more, check out the full playlist linked in the description of this video. New real stories are on the way, and I'd love to share them with you. Hopefully, I'll see you next time. If this journey resonated with you, please hit subscribe and tap the bell so you'll never miss the latest stories. Thank you for listening, and remember, even the hardest trauma stories can end with freedom and dignity.